you to just enjoy the experience that we're about to encounter. I'd like to introduce to you a man of very humble beginning, a man that was able to overcome the horrific misclassification of special education. A caring man, a man that will encourage you because he's been there and done that. And I'd like to encourage you to keep an open mind and be empowered to change your life. I'd like to present to you a man of men, Richard Utley. Richard Utley.
Good evening, and welcome to another Did You Know? Well, I got an exciting program tonight. Hopefully you will learn some things and you'll be uplifted by it, and it will motivate you, and you will want to do some moving and some shaking. But before this, what is it? Black History Month. What does Black History Month mean? It means a lot of things, and one of the important things that I think that we need to do, and I've often said this, we need to talk about and define who we are. And I told you that's why I have this program, is because I wanted us to define who we are instead of having somebody on a newscast try to define us in 3 seconds, or in a movie to define us a way that we are not really that way. So since it's February and it's Black History Month, I want to say a couple things. Too often history has been rewritten to conceal the horrors of yesterday. Think about that. Too often history has been rewritten to conceal the horrors of yesterday. I want you to think about that for a minute, because that's very important. The other thing I'm going to say, memorials are not just about a frozen past, but they are also about what we choose to honor in our past. And that person was an unknown who came up with that. As I've always said that, this is a Did You Know program. And so I talk about history, so I want some of you to continue to do your research on history. So when we think about Black history, and you think about Carter G. Woodson, who is he? I want you to do your research, find out who he is. I mean, why do I even bring up Carter G. Woodson? Black history should be passed from one generation to the other generation. And it's important for us to pass that information. Because if we don't pass that information, what happens, and somebody else pass it for us, sometimes the hidden truth is there. And so we got to make sure that things that have talked about us or been brought up about us, that we need to define ourselves. And I've always said that. And that to me is very important. So listen, audience, please, we got to do a better job of our own history. They don't want to tell our history, then we need to tell our history, and we need to tell it right. I've been saying this for a long time, and I will continue to say that. Sometimes, if we told our history and all the wonderful things that we have done, there will be a lot of people that walk the streets who think they're nothing. They ain't nothing, never was nothing, and that's not true. That is not true. So all of those people who are all scared about that woke thing, well, guess what? Then we need to take the responsibility of telling our own history. It's just like the Confederate monuments. What did they really stand for? I know what they stood for, and you knew what they stood for. And sometimes it gets misled. People say, oh, they're a symbol. They're a symbol of what? First of all, it was really about slavery, not about state rights. And most people that you would ask about the monuments or the Confederate flag, they couldn't explain it to you. And keep in mind, they lost. So I want to say to you tonight that please, please, please do your history. Find out who people are. You know, yeah, we all know who the Tuskegee Airmen are, but do you know who the 761st Tank Battalion of Black Panthers are? Or do you know who Benjamin Davis is? Or do you know who Booker T. Washington is? Or do you know who Philip Randolph is? And I'm willing to bet you a lot of people don't know who they are because we don't talk about them. We don't read about them anymore. And we let a 1 second or 2 second blip. So I'm going to put you on the spot, ladies and gentlemen. Don't let this 1 month define who we are. So do your research, do your research, do your research, because history is very important. And tonight I have a young man on. I'm going to bring him on, and I'm going to say some things about him. His name is Rick Adams. Now, those of you from the western part of the state would know who he is. He's an activist. His resume is a who's who. I mean, he's a person that's been on the Pittsburgh School Board member. He's been a Pittsburgh Human Relations Commissioner. He's been a former Democratic committee man. He's been a retired community college administrator. He's a radio host. He's a social media influence. And he's had, I would say, he's going to say he had 30 years of fighting in the struggle. So, Rich, you're on now, and I'm going to have you talk about, tell the people who you are. But I want to say a couple things. I've known him a long time. Actually, we went to the same high school together. And he's the person that I would honestly tell anybody that he's the kind of guy that you want to be there with you. He's the kind of guy that you want. So, Rick, would you tell people who you are? But before that, I want to say this first. We need leaders not in love with money, but in love with justice. Not in love with publicity, but in love with humanity. And that was Martin Luther King Jr., and I think it defines who you are. So please tell everybody who you are.
All right. Well, thank you, brother. That's very uplifting, those words, and hopefully I can live up to it and deserve it. I'm always trying to maintain my stance relative to the community. My first love was being a community organizer. And before I go too much further, I'm glad you recognized us Bulldogs in terms of Western Hills High School there in the East End of Pittsburgh. But also that you have such a magnificent first name. I think that's a great name. As Richard's got to stick together. I very early got the bug. I actually count my feeling that I was part of the Black freedom struggle. At that time, the Black Power movement, certainly more of a youthful observer and student of the civil rights movement. Dr. King was assassinated. I was just short of my 17th birthday. And from that time till today, I'm a soldier in the movement, if you will. And so having gone to Bowdoin College, which a lot of people don't know of Bowdoin, it is a Ivy League school. It's a very small school, obviously a very white school. And a lot of people wondered why I went there. But I knew between my interest in the movement, my interest in music, partying, and Black women, that it would be a challenge if I had gone to a historically Black college. A lot of people were just totally shocked I didn't do that. And years later, in fact, not too long ago, 10 years ago or so, I had to laugh. We had a conference there at Howard, and I looked around and I said, yeah, brother, you made the right decision, because the best of Africana, intellectually and physically and culturally, that's where it's at. And so I was able to kind of focus. But even then, back in those days, one of my most profound, up to this day, experience I've ever had was being a delegate to the National Black Political Convention in Gary, Indiana in 1972. never had seen a school that big. 10,000 of us got in this school, in this gymnasium. And the mayor at the time was another great Richard, Dick Hatcher, and a very progressive mayor. And we had this conference where everybody who was anybody, 72, Dr. King had just been killed 4 years before, and Coretta King was there, and Betty Shabazz, and Bobby Seale, the Panther Party, and Jesse Jackson, and Amiri Baraka, and future mayors and senators, state senators, were all in presence there at that conference. Almost anybody who was anybody. And there I was, 20 years old, at that point, having organized a delegation from Maine. So that's a strange story. I have there's a listing somewhere of me as a delegate from Maine. Of course, I had to explain to them I'm from Pennsylvania. But from that point, when the Black Caucus, Congressional Black Caucus, had 17 members, now we got 55. I have been involved in various aspects of the political movements, if you will, having been a campaign chair for some candidates, having been a candidate myself for city council, state representative, school board, which I won, a lot of losses. And now I'm kind of glad I didn't get elected, because some of the stuff you got to go through, smile when you don't feel like smiling, and eat rubber chicken dinners. I don't know how long I would have stuck with that. But anyway, my interest was fueled by the Black freedom movement and the broader movements. In the 80s, I was chair of the state Rainbow Coalition, and in fact chaired Jesse Jackson's campaign in 1988. In 84, before that, we have a mutual friend that I competed with for state representative. He won, I didn't, but I was always proud that no elected official and anybody of note was coming out speaking up for Jesse in 84. And on my state legislative card, flyers and things, I always said, and remember, vote for me for state representative, but also remember to vote for Jesse Jackson for president of the United States. And enjoy the relationship with Rainbow Push and with Reverend Jackson to this day. So a lot of adventuresome things. In fact, I have to step back sometimes. Some people that others might look at and be, oh, that's so-and-so. You get kind of blasé, which is weird. And I've always been there, but not necessarily trying to dominate. I'm chair of the Institute of the Black World 21st Century, and that's run by the founder and president, Dr. Ron Daniels, who came out of Youngstown, Ohio, but spent some time in the Hills District. So he knew of Carl Redwood Sr., as he knows Carl Redwood Jr., but he had some of his most formative years in Pittsburgh's Hill District. Ron ran for president as independent, 92. And he is the head of a major thrust around reparations, but that we can talk about later. But I found myself working with those leaders that I discerned were serious, were committed, were about results, and had the ethical structure that I was proud to work with them. So over time, local folks fitting that same thing. With the assembly I mentioned, Reverend Tom Smith would be one, but of course Leroy Patrick, Reverend Patrick, and there were a number of others. Elmer Williams, Reverend Elmer Williams, who I succeeded on the school board, were people who were making things happen on behalf of our people. And I'll stop there. I don't think you want me to just talk straight through, Brother Utley, but I could do it.
I just think that you gave a gist of where you were. And so what makes you continue to do what you're doing in terms of I think you said you just came back from a conference. Would you tell us a little bit about the conference you just came back to last week?
Right. This is the second Congress of the Movement for Black Lives. And there's a number of constellations or organizations that represent and use parts of that name. This isn't the group that got the $90 million, and there was some scandal, and deservedly so, about how money was being spent. This is a group that at one time they were all allied, and this is a group that has been working now for 10 years. And I can show folks so they can see it. In it together, building Black futures. And M4BL stands for the Movement for Black Lives. And they have a number of projects. They call what they're doing an ecosystem. And it gave me a glimpse of the future because they're very much into the pronouns. And some people go by they, some go by any of the pronouns. One person presented themselves and said, look, it depends on how I feel that day. If I feel like a woman, then I'm a woman. If I feel like a man, I'm a man, and I don't know what else. But it's an interesting kind of thing. And I told some of the younger, most of the conference is younger brothers and sisters who are involved on the front lines. And they came out of Ferguson, a lot of them, where Mike Brown was killed outside of St. Louis. And they've been going ever since and organizing across the country. And I told them that in my quote unquote heyday or early days that approximated many of their ages, the Black Power movement, I'd have got ran out of a room if I'd raised something about gays and LGBT. Well, we didn't even know that term, but how different things are and how smoothly everybody was interacting. It was very interesting for me to see this. And then, of course, they're very up on the social media, but you name it, reparations, climate control, reproductive rights, the rights of women, the rights of the LGBTQI community, the Electoral Justice Project. They've gotten to the point where they do have access to some funds that they can train and pay young people, and I guess they're not all young people, but mostly young people, who can attach themselves to electoral initiatives in different cities around the country. Most of them are based in the South. So the whole notion that many groups in our past have spoken of about the Black community in the South, the Black Belt, is where we need to do the heavy lifting, and that would overturn the whole system. And now today, it might have slipped a little bit, the Black population, but now today, the majority of Black people do live in the South. And I remind listeners that Dr. King spoke of, can't nobody ride your back unless you're bent over. And the first time the bent over posture was overcome was in the historic civil rights movement. And when it happened that we stood up, what happened? All kinds of positions, institutions, and notions were crushed forevermore. Certainly around everyone has the right to be a citizen and access to public services and to government and to equal rights. And of course, the historic Voting Rights Act. Those occurred in 64 and 65. And to this day, if you look at the battles we're having, we're fighting over those very same things as call them MAGA or whatever. Those conservative forces are trying to turn back the clock. So you hear today in states and in cities where they're throwing tens of thousands, if not 100,000 Black people off the rolls for voting. I mean, they're that blatant with it. And we have to be internally vigilant to fight that. So that's what keeps me in here. That work now I've started since 1967. I started with, I'm still involved. The job's not done. Too many of our people are still stuck in hellholes, if you will, whether it's rural or it's urban. There are too many people who struggle to put food on the table. There's still problems, even though there's been great progress around access to healthcare. There's still people who don't have access. And then even if you do, like I do, some of these bills, and thank God for coverage you can get, if you can get to the age that you get Medicare, or because of income, you could access Medicare, then you got some semblance. But if you're kind of in the middle and you got to pay for your healthcare, some of these bills are outrageous. Big Pharma is one of the greatest purveyors of inequity among health for poor people, for women. Black women suffer an abominably high rate around maternal deaths of the mother and the child. And so much that we fought about then, as much as things have changed, they're a lot like they were from the beginning. It's just a matter of degree. And maybe there's some areas where we've overcome some of these barriers geographically, depending on the Black political power and institutional power that's there to have to make a different outcome come forth. Many are still beset with the ancient evils and opponents of Black.
Okay, let me ask you this here. I hear what you're saying. You've been in the struggle a long time. Why does it seem like the motion of the struggle is kind of like not as prevalent as it's been in the past? I mean, we used to always be up on what was going on. The minority community always knew what was going on. And is it because we don't have the kind of leaders anymore? Or is it because we feel that we're further along than we really are? I mean, what is your perception on that?
Well, I think a lot of it can be called we're victims of our own success. Sometimes this idea is expressed by saying we were better off when we were segregated. You and I, the communities we grew up in, the doctor, the dentist, the lawyer, the business person, owner, the funeral director, the college professors, the few that were there that attended primarily historically Black colleges, those who had some professional and other achievement lived among the working class and the poor. You could see Dr. So-and-so one block over from you, maybe on the same block you were on. And so you knew who they were. So that you had an idea of what Black people could do and what they could be. And if you got the opportunity to talk to them, you really understood as a Black person what they went through and then the advice that they gave you. Well, now you can live anywhere you want, kinda. The young man that got shot because he was jogging, two white men got in a truck and followed him and they shot him. It's still not where it needs to be. But
So
what it does, it breaks down our communication structures, part of our social organization and network. Go ahead.
So what should we do?
Well,
What should we do to get the hot button? What should we? I mean, I would be honest with you. I thought we'd be further along than we are. There's no question we've come a long way, but we
Right.
got a long way to go. And so therefore our communities, our neighborhoods are dying. Where I grew up in Pittsburgh, I was there last week. It looked like a bomb hit it. It's a bomb hit it. How do we, back when you look at whether it's the Jesse Jacksons and, say, I am somebody, or whether you look at Martin Luther King and the things that he says, what do we do? I mean, we need to do something. As Martin Luther King said, they don't get rid of me because I had a dream. They got rid of me because I woke up. So take what I've said and tell me, what do you think that we should do?
Well, some of the things that we know to do, and I was saying at the conference in Atlanta, that we need to make sure we define what freedom is, and that politically, for instance, we need to build independent political and economic bases. Now, there are some stunning successes within the movement, not for profit. Of course, there's the Tyler Perrys and the Oprahs and a bunch of folks that can come forward, and actually a number of billionaires. Back in the day, if you had said there would be Black billionaires, I'd have said, get out of here, you're being ridiculous. But those who have built institutions, Don Lee, some people might know, he goes now by Haki Madhubuti. He has a whole former school building, a block long in Chicago. That's the Institute for Positive Studies and Third World Press. And he has built an institution, but it has taken decades to build an institution. When you think about it, we've all been parts of organizations, clubs, and other kind of formations, but how long do they last? And do they grow in power, or do they kind of just go along? We still got SCLC, but it's not what it used to be. We have the Nation of Islam, but it's not what it had used to be under Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X. And now our dear brother is in his waning years, twilight years, Minister Farrakhan. He brought some strength and rebirth to that movement. But when you look around at different formations, the old mayor ain't what it used to be. And I think our challenge is to keep building these institutions. I've said on a couple of occasions, our quote unquote enemies, those who would oppose us, they could be a shriveled up old man, barely able to walk, drags himself in, maybe chauffeur brings him in to be the CEO, president of XYZ Corporation, and they got great power. They can pick up a phone and call. If they want to cause you and me trouble, we got trouble. If they say, fix these people, man, to get them out of my hair. We too many times have to build a Superman and a Superwoman, and they have to be extraordinary creatures, 1 in 100 years, 1 in 20 years, 50 years. And my point about the example about the darn near shriveled up man running a big corporation is that it doesn't matter to a certain extent who's in that chair, because it is an institution with resources. So the next guy or girl might be much younger, but they still got the same resources, and they might go about it a little more energetic, and they might have newer and contemporary ideas so they can forward the corporation. We tend to start from the beginning, do the whole thing from the start, when we should be building. And we say it all the time, we stand on the shoulders of giants, and we do. But the opposition has been so strong that they've been able to destroy those institutions, leaders, and organizations that they want to, almost at will. And then the other thing is, our community suffers like everybody else. We were talking before we came on the air. Homewood had a nice business district, our neighborhood. You could go down there. In fact, I had to at least put on a regular dress shirt. I couldn't go down there in blue jeans and a t-shirt. And you could go down there and you could buy diamonds, and you could buy fur, and you could go to a supermarket. And I mean, it was all there. We had old fashioned bargain days, and they had pizzas and cotton candy. And it was a great little business district. And then after the death of Dr. King, but actually a little bit before that, there was deterioration setting in. And the popular myth is that we burnt down our own community and ran all the businesses. Well, no, by the time Dr. King was killed, I would say the majority of them were already gone. One, what was that? A fruit market, and one was a lumber yard. There was at least 2 businesses that white people burnt their own stuff up and got the insurance just to get out of there. Where business went when we were at a point of saying, let's build collectively, that's when the malls came. That killed the white neighborhoods too. They just were able to come back because they had access to capital, credit, and folks who could put some money to the task. We didn't have as much. So when the malls, suburban malls killed the inner city business districts, we suffered like everybody. But as it has often been said, they catch a cold and we get pneumonia. So I think that's part of the problem in terms of that. So we've been scattered. We've got achievement. We get used to some things that we didn't know, let alone have access to in the ghetto or the working class. And people are doing what the fight was about. Some of those who are from the Marxist socialist persuasion would say all the struggle is at base about material things. Folks want to be well fed. They want a roof over their head. They want a vehicle. They want a job to give some dignity. And they want political representation. And they want access to a redress if they got a legal problem. That's what everybody wants. So it's
They want it, but how do we communicate that? Everybody wants it, but how do we communicate that to the masses in our own neighborhoods? Because what has happened, people have defined our neighborhoods as many things, all negative. Like I get so upset when I hear people when they use the word defund the police. Like my neighborhood don't want police protection. That's crazy,
Right.
but they've defined us that way. And I would like for you to talk about that, and then tell me, do you see or don't you see, or how do we develop new leaders to step up to the plate?
Okay. Good question, obviously. And that's the question of the hour, I guess I would say. Um, we need to, and on one level, it sounds like rhetoric. What I said earlier about the independent organization, the notion of self-determination. If you know that we want, God bless the child that has their own, that we want our own businesses, we want our own financial institutions, we want our own parcels of land where our families can play safely and our culture can be celebrated and others are welcome to come. We're not saying, it's going to be 100% Black or anything like that, but you see other communities and how they control what goes on and what happens to them and what doesn't happen to them because they got political and economic power and organization. Money's great, and I don't knock anybody getting money. Just like people have questioned me when I say I'm a socialist, and they'll say, "Well, you're doing this, or you got this car." I didn't take a vow of poverty. That's not what it's about. And I'm not against private property. I'm about equity and more equal things going on, the structure of relations. We have to capture those that live in the suburbs now, to some degree, celebrate, observe Kwanzaa and those principles that lay, I think, a very secular but moral type of civic religion, if you will, that says we should care about, leave our neighborhoods better than how we found them, have faith, imani, have creativity, utilize the strengths that come out of our African descended culture and, come with new stuff, but build on the strengths that we have. There are a number of programs now where people are rites of passage programs. The young people, if they know who they are, I think it makes it difficult for them to do some of the things that they do. And let me quickly say, we often talk about the deaths in the street, and I always point out the Pittsburgh Courier does a thing and shows how many people were shot in a year. Well, at least 50%, if not slightly more, are not children. They're like over 18. Many of them are over 20 years of age, and many of them are in their 20s and 30s. Those are not children. Those are people that caught up in economic and social situations where they've gone a wrong direction. And once they get caught up in that system, the incarceral system, and that's where they defund the police. It's not do away with money for the police. It's shift money to, instead of the first people on the block when somebody's having a mental episode, it's not people with guns who are really trained to subdue and apprehend criminals. But how about some folks that got social worker background, mental health backgrounds, that they can intervene and we have a result short of people being killed? Same with drugs. It should be a public policy, public health problem. It's not, if people who drink, we don't necessarily shoot them. So whatever the drug is, and they're all drugs, all of them that make people hyper, everything from nicotine to, we mask what drugs are, and they're this scary thing. But in other societies, other countries, Portugal and others, they've legalized them and dealt with it purely as a public health. And so if you take the incentive out of it in terms of making money, then you don't produce Al Capones or what did we have our thing, the Black Mafia. I never understood that, why we want to take Italian names. If you want to be a gangster, then at least be a authentic Black gangster, what have you. And I'm not advocating that. But we need to fight for citizenship, civics back in the schools. We need to educate our own kids. So schools that are controlled, whether they're public or they're charter, Black folk need to be in there. Black men need to be there for young Black boys, and Black women need to be there for young Black girls. And tell them what is the special part about being Black and what they need to do to be successful.
I mean, that's good. And I guess that's what concerns me a lot, is that nobody's out there talking the talk and let alone walking the walk. It just seems like I would admit to you early on the NAACP, the churches played a great role, and also the community centers and things like that played a great role into our communities. Now I do realize that a lot of successful people did move out the neighborhood a little bit. But so I'm asking you, what do you think that based on the fact that you're still fighting the fight, you still believe in what you're fighting, and yet young people at this point don't know the legacies that got them there? I mean, when I hear a young person say, well, they're not going to vote because it don't count or they don't care, they have no idea that some of your forefathers or our forefathers died so that they could vote. It was the principle of voting. Or we talk about economic development. How do we get them to understand economic development? Because we have to support one another for economic development. And then the first thing they bring up is the old tradition, crabs in the barrel, nobody really cares. But we've been saying this for so long, and I just see it more destruction if we don't do something.
Well, there's not a quick fix unless you have massive resources, on the level of federal government or something like that. Some of the young people and not so young people know that folks died to get the right to vote. They have heard the story. They've heard of Martin King and others who fought, but they don't know the deeper stories. And so Black history, those Southern governors can talk about they're taking it out and saying that's discriminatory and you can't have it in the curriculum. Shouldn't matter. How do we first learn Black history? It was taught in the church, like you said. It was taught in the home. You went to a camp, and it was taught there among the activities. And yeah, you did swimming and horseback riding and archery. But there were Black history classes, and the adults were instructing us about these things. We need to intentionally refocus on doing more of those things. And we're doing a lot more than you might surmise, but it's not, it's not exciting. If 500 of us go marching down the street with baseball bats, oh yeah, that'll be all over international news now. No such thing as national news. You get on the internet, and before you know it, TikTok and Instagram and Twitter or X, whatever, the information's everywhere. So we have to do a better job of marketing and controlling messages about ourselves. And we need to teach, in case folk don't know it, those who have power tend to be groups, not individuals. Now, yeah, you can make it, but that's the old, and that was, I think, this country's greatest success. They have convinced everyone that your individual rights to our detriment supersedes everything. I got mine, you get yours. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Well, how'd you get in trouble with the law? Well, most of our youngsters aren't in trouble with the law. When they do these studies of teenage pregnancies, drug use, surprisingly, most of the time it shows that Black young people are being involved in those things at a much lesser rate than the white dominant community. So the true story is never told when that is put there. And when put in the proper setting, with the proper supports, Black students do as well as anybody else and frequently supersede it, what the mainstream is doing. But if you don't get the access, the president of Harvard now all of a sudden is somebody who just writes, steal, plagiarizes somebody else's work, and, seemingly they're unqualified. That's, in this day and age, I mean, I often try to wonder, where do I get all my ideas? And is there something that I might say repeatedly that I think is mine, might have been said before, or maybe I read it in a book 20 years ago. So I could easily be writing something that somebody could come up and say, well, Mr. Smith said that in 1920, and you stole it. You're not giving him proper attribution. Well, society, culture, that is all collective. I mean, we are social beings. You know, you can leave animals in the woods and the number of them can survive and figure out a way. You leave a baby in the woods and even a child, and they don't have that social construct, construction. They don't have, they wouldn't be able to speak. They would have no culture. We're social beings. So everything is contained and we have to get control of it. Now we got some very scary things. AI, artificial intelligence. Where is that going? They could have you and me making a crazy speech with our image and our voices reproduced that our mamas would think it was us saying it, and it would be a lie. It would not be true. So how do we guard against that? And then there's the more insidious thing that's been going on all the time, where history has been obscured, denied, or lied about, and the opposite is told as the truth, when in fact, if you can do the research, you can prove that it's not true. George Washington didn't even chop down a tree and say he didn't lie. They say that's a myth. I cannot lie. There's all kind of myths like that. Some myths are good. John Henry, that beat the railroad, big, strong, working black man, honest man. Well, there was somebody supposedly to kind of fit that in some kind of contest, but for the most part, that's mythology. So I'm all for, in that kind of thing, good mythology. And you really don't have to stretch it. We have so many heroes and sheroes, great kings and queens. And beyond that, I get sick of that. If you understand the structure of societies, everybody wasn't a king. That doesn't make sense. Everybody wasn't a queen. Now, you might have been in the royal house. You might have been in some kind of position of great importance. You counted the grain of the harvest every year or whatever. You had jobs and things, but everybody wasn't at the top. Was it a society where everybody was equal? Probably in some of the primitive, so-called primitive, societies, people more or less were all equal. Even the thing about kings, some of the African nations, villages, tribes would have the women consult on who was best to be king. And I'm not sure outside of the king royal line, but within the royal line, you might be the oldest son. But if you were dumb, they would say, nah, we need to let the middle son or the younger son be the king and not this person. So my point is, there was participation and there was rationality and there was some thinking and planning about what was good for the order, for the community. And so the more that we can build community, and one of the great contradictions to me, I hesitate to say this because it sounds crazy. I want to say almost I love Facebook, but I like it immensely. And why? I don't know about you or anybody else. When's the last time you wrote a letter? I haven't written a letter to nobody in 20 years, but I have sent all kinds of messages to people through Facebook. So there's a level of community. I communicate with my relatives on a level that I would never, and it's not like I got this great record of communication, but it would be none, zero, null, if I didn't have this magnificent technology that makes it a little easier.
Okay, I want to ask you, I'm going to throw out some things for you, and I'd like for you to respond to them in the way that you see things.
Okay.
The importance of ownership and economic development.
Critical. Your security is based on ownership, and now a lot of us, I'm renting now, but I got my 403B and I got access to a little bit of money if I need it, and not rich or nothing, but I've had a fruitful enough career working that I was able to build up a little something. So I do own shares of stock and mutual funds and CDs, all. I don't do them. I let my 403B entity, TIA, for those who teach and research and teachers, have access to this huge institution that you can use for your benefit. But those who have land, I would argue families, if you can pool your money, have no land, but you got money and you can work together and pull it, pull it. I look at folks now getting into our ages at the other end of the spectrum, and especially those who are activists who weren't as fortunate as me. I think, every once in a while it hits me, we ought to have some houses for these folks. Dr. King and Malcolm both died poor. I mean, they didn't have like huge amounts of money or nothing. And that should not be like that. And it should not be for the average person in this country. We have poor people, but we have the richest country in the world at this point. So why do we have people sleeping outside and all of that? So ownership, setting something aside. I wish I listened to my father, but he told me, like, look, if you just put $1 away every week, if you do it daily or monthly or whatever, but if you could do it, say, every week. And when he told me the story at the end of it, my conclusion was, okay, at the end of the week, I got $52. I was like, well, okay, what's the big deal about that? Now, I wish I had done that 50 years ago.
Right. Well, I think
if I didn't put anything else to it, it would have multiplied to a degree. There would have been a consequential sum of money.
I want to get into some political stuff for you. When we look at the election coming up in 2024, how do you perceive we as a people should deal with that?
Quite frankly, and some of my friends who are nice people, and I mean, I'm not ridiculing them or making fun. I mean, they're really decent people, but they happen to be Republicans. But I'm saying now, too bad. The Republicans today represent the Democrats of 1924, when the entire convention and the organization of the Democratic Party was KKK. The Ku Klux Klan ran the Democratic Party, big time. We now have the MAGA people, the skinheads, the Aryan Nation, the Proud Boys. Who else have we learned about? They are like cancer to us and other people of color. And in this time, though, Black people have more political power than they've ever had, more political and economic power than they've ever had in our history in this country. I think it was around the 1972 Gary National Black Political Convention. I think we had about 1,000 maybe elected officials. Now it's well up over 10,000. Proportionally, it is not where it should be with 500,000 elected officials. It's somewhere between 500,000 and 550 was the last figure I saw. But the fact that we have mayors, we have a governor, we have senators, we have 55 congressional representatives. We are in power positions in unions. There are still organizations like the one I try to keep going in Pittsburgh, the Western Pennsylvania Black Political Assembly, something that is in its second iteration. But Phil Carter, you may remember Phil, he had a version of it right after in the 70s and into the 80s that organized Black people independently to think for themselves and support candidates. And it wasn't important Democrat or Republican. But I'm saying here in this election in 2024, we ought to destroy the Republican Party. We ought to vote every one of them out. I don't care if they're a good boy or girl, vote them out. Because when people understand that if you mess with them and threaten their lives, their livelihood, and their families, that you got to come back to crush them, then that'll make some of this nonsense go away. So I'm clear cut saying we need to defeat every Republican. The Republican Party started March 15th, 1854, and it's at sunset, November 5th, 2024. We should have a new party. And forget a third party. We should be at least, if we can't be the first party, then let's be the second party. But in terms of power, just pure power, you don't want to have affirmative action and all that kind of stuff, then we will deal from a position of strength and we will get the things we need for people. And the quietest is kept, public school systems and you name it, things that exist that help people now, Affordable Act, the Affordable Care Act, Black people have been the pioneers getting many of the social services and benefits that make the society somewhat comfortable. We were the catalyst for those things being developed. And, not like people think now, like welfare was for Black people. At first, we couldn't even get welfare. 70% of us were working in domestic work and on the farms, and that didn't qualify you to get welfare. So this myth about, and the notion that we're lazy. Well, if you're a slave, how are you going to be lazy? I mean, that's ridiculous. So, and we see now with Trump, everybody deserves representation, even stupid people. But now, when you don't know what you're talking about, you're doing things that will hurt the body politic, that will hurt society, that will hurt people. Folks need to get away from that white supremacy thing and say, look, I'm a worker like they are. We ought to be working together so that the upper class is not exploiting us all and eating our lunch, our breakfast, and our dinners. And we need to organize around our objective interests, not fairy tales that got people thinking that they've lost something or we're stealing something from them. And that is not the case at all. But I'm very clear politically, those who have that anti-worker, anti-democratic, want to be authoritarian, they need to take that and go somewhere. And we can help them on their way by turning out in a massive way like we've never done before.
Okay. I know that you have some political philosophy, and I want to give you time to articulate that political philosophy to the audience in terms of where you see we are and how you believe where we are and how you look at it from the perspective.
Well, one thing that should be clear, and it's not, because our political discourse, our debates, if you want to call it that, we've almost never had debates for 50 years or so, at least in the modern era. What is decided and debated in the most powerful legislative body in the world, bar none, and that is the United States House of Representatives and the United States Senate. Right now, depending on them, we will see how far the genocide will go in Gaza as the Israeli forces fight Hamas, who did that horrendous attack on them. But now they've gone so far, they're having 1.8 million of 2 million people moving up and down the country. They're just out in shacks and things, don't have water. That's unconscionable. What is going to happen in Ukraine, whether Russia or Ukraine wins this struggle, ultimately it's going to be decided in our government. So when we look at Africa, who knew, I don't know if people heard, that in Ukraine supplies something like, it's over 50% of the grain that goes to Africa. Now, wait a minute, didn't anybody tell me that? So you disrupt that, then you mean Africans are gonna starve? So we're all connected together in that way. Right now, the United States has, I think it's like 50 military stations in Africa. Okay, well, what are we doing over there? We just had 2 young men and a woman killed over there in the so-called Middle East. They were soldiers, and actually I think they were reservists. So who's in Africa? What is our interest over there? And what are we advocating? And are we supporting the right guys, the good guys? As Black people, Black citizens are the most powerful nation on the planet. If we want a better world, starting with ourselves, charity starts at home, I think it's the same. But also we have been people who have been God-fearing, traditionally, for the most part. The 3 great religions, so-called, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, they come out of Africa. They come up with this trick about the Middle East, but look, they're on the coast of Africa, in Africa, you name it. So we need to have a more global understanding. brothers and sisters in the Caribbean, for example, all formed commissions, reparations commissions, 14 or 15 of those nations, and are working with the organization I chair, the Institute of the Black World, 21st Century, with our national organization, commission, NARC, which is a hell of a name, but the National African American Reparations Commission. And so the whole fight to get that approved and really launch this reparations initiative to make people whole. You can't start a race last week and it's a 2-week race, and then you let me start running now and say, well, now we're equal. You got your chance, and you got a week's head start. People who understand wealth and how the country works, how capitalism works, if you will, it's based on what you can carry from generation to generation. So when some people could carry the chicken and the horse and the cows and whatever, they also had on that ledger us. I was listening to a film about reparations and how our costs were things like $500 and $200 and $800. Now, this is back in the 1800s. So today, that means we as a person, as a commodity, if you will, chattel slavery, were worth thousands of dollars. White families and those who came later, I know they'll say, well, we had nothing to do with slavery, but you living off the wealth that was generated by Black people who worked hundreds of years for free. You can't just say, oh, well, bygones be bygones, we're all equal. That's not going to get it. So, and that's not an attack on whites. That's what it is. I know you have a business mind and things you've done. That stuff doesn't just pop up. Wealth, it's created. And we had a big share. In fact, I think they said, it was $3 trillion or something when slavery ended, that African people were the largest economic asset of this country, of the United States. So something got to get right with that. And then throughout the world, how are we treating people? The Congo, genocides going on there, not just Gaza, all over the world, these situations are happening. And at bottom, there's religious kind of things and some political differences. But at bottom, I'd say that it is economic inequality. If the world were more like middle-class people, they don't tend to be gangsters, criminals, revolutionaries. They're trying to raise their family, pay their taxes that they have to pay, and go through life loving their significant other and their children and their grandchildren. And I think that's not really pie in the sky, that we could organize ourselves better. It's like saying the United States is overcrowded. Well, if you travel around and go in the interiors of these states, including Pennsylvania, there ain't nothing there. There's a few people, but basically, if you go out west, there's big expanses where there are no people. Now, the Israelis made nice areas with water and palm trees and everything out of the desert. So I know we could do that. So it's a matter of our political will and our understanding of our obligation to help each other is the stage we want to get to.
Okay, time is going out, so you got 2 minutes to, what you would like for my audience to remember what you finally said here.
Okay. Well, I think at bottom we're each our brother's keeper. I think that we need to be open, whether it's about gender and sexuality. I mean, I've learned some things that never occurred to me. I can't imagine transformation of gender. I mean, that's just like, whoa, that's not in my wheelhouse. But I'm not condemning anybody. People come as they are, and we all have rights. Almost like when Rodney King got up and made that plea to the people, can't we all just get along? Well, evidently we can't, but we have to work earnestly toward that. We still have mutual assured destruction, MAD, M-A-D, in effect. I think the United States got maybe 9,000 nuclear weapons, and the Russians got 6,000. What are we going to do with that? That would end the whole planet. So hopefully we won't fire that stuff up. But you got to be involved. One thing I've learned, and you may have discovered this too, There are a lot of people who are in charge that like aren't really equipped or they're mediocre. And so I never rest when I realize somebody like Donald Trump might be in charge of the nuclear weapons, or one of his followers might be the one who keeps turning on the lights and controlling the dam opening and shut and the flow of water. And we might have been shut out of a lot of things, Black people, but we are as smart as anybody. And I think some of the political positions that have been expressed in this election says they deserve representation, but really stupid people should not be in charge. And, you know, folk can get mad, but that's what I see going on. Because some of the things Marjorie Taylor and others are saying, I mean, they're just Bobart. You know, you start naming these folks, even the Speaker of the House, they don't got it. You know, you and I got smarter than that in the little ghetto school we're so proud of. We don't know where they were studying, but we could do better.
Well, I'm glad that you told that we can do better. I'm glad that you talked about ownership. I'm glad you talked about that we need to direct the narrative the way that we want to direct the narrative, and that we need to keep our eye on the dot. And if we don't do that and we fall asleep on the wheel, then it's going to be shame on us. And I would think that you would agree with my final statement is that me and you have done a lot of political stuff and we've seen it. But now it's time for some other people to step up to the plate. But we also need to get young people involved, because they're the ones at the end of this is going to be the ones that have to shape the next generation. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, thank you for coming on with, boy, this went fast.
You did. Thank you. Give me the opportunity.
I hope that people understood what you said and take it apart. Because, you know, we have a tendency sometimes we only hear the one word and we forget everything else that was said. And right. You said a lot of very important things. And I'm not expecting everybody that's listening or seeing is going to agree with everything. But I can say this, and I'm going to end with this. There's something that you said for everybody.
Right.
So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining the Richard Utley Show on The Voice 17104. We will be here on The Voice 17104 every first and third Tuesday from 6:30 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. Once again, thanks for viewing. Remember to visit us on Facebook at Richard Utley, and we welcome your questions and or comments. The Voice 17104.com. This is Zanetta Wingfield, and you're listening to The Voice 17104.com. The Voice